Good morning. I'm Katie Meyer. I am honored to be here today as the representative from the Pride ERG and as the moderator for this conversation. Thank you all for being here. The Pride ERG chose to focus on the theme, We Are Family, this month in honor of Pride Month for a variety of reasons. And it's culminating with this conversation with these wonderful community partners and activists. And the reason we chose that theme, there's a couple reasons. And I will say it really resonated with folks in general. But the first reason was, I think we all experienced in 2020 new challenges and opportunities around our families as we understood who was in our circle and who wasn't. We had to think a lot about family and what that meant to us, whether that's a biological family, an adopted family, a chosen family. You know, many folks within the LGBT community do face issues within their families of not having support. And so sometimes our chosen families are the path we take and are just as valuable as any other sort of family. Secondly, we really wanted to address the issues that disproportionately face the LGBTQ community and our youth. We know that LGBT youth face homelessness, concerns around mental health, and unfortunately, death by suicide at disproportionate rates to non-LGBT folks. And we think this is a really important topic. And finally, as we talk to folks around our organization, it's not just the members of the LGBT community who are navigating these sorts of issues within their homes. It's our siblings and our parents and our children and our stepchildren and our aunts and uncles. And so we really wanted to extend the conversation and make the message clear that allyship starts at home, and it starts with your families, and letting any one of your family members know that if they come out, if they are gender non-binary, or if they're a member of the LGBT community, if they're trans, that they are supported, because that can make a world of difference in somebody's journey, having that sort of allyship in the home. So again, thank you everyone for being here. I am delighted to introduce our panelists. We have Rick Worth from the Children's Home of Northern Kentucky. We have Morgan Manzer from Nova Scotia Legal Aid. And we have Isaiah Phoebus from Lighthouse Youth and Family Services. Our panelists do incredible work in the community, and again, to each of you, thank you for being here. Thank you for your time with us today. I'm going to go ahead and start the questions. The first one, I'm going to start with Rick, and then we'll go to Morgan and then to Isaiah. We have provided bios to the community, so they have an idea of your bio, or sorry, to my colleagues on this call. But I would like for you all to tell us about yourself, your organization, and how you specifically support LGBTQ youth.
Katie, thanks for having me here, and I would just like to say a big hello and a thank you, really, to the Cincinnati Bell family. Cincinnati Bell has been a trusted partner here at Children's Home of Northern Kentucky for years. And so I'm very grateful to have that kind of support, and it's really a pleasure to join you and Morgan and Isaiah for this really important conversation. Children's Home of Northern Kentucky has been in existence since 1882, and for the last century and a half, coming up on a century and a half of work, we've been taking care of vulnerable youth and vulnerable families. And the way we've done that has changed over the years. We started out as a classic orphanage after the Civil War here in Northern Kentucky, and many times families and children were coming into our care because of issues like a death of a parent, or it might have been extreme poverty. We did that type of residential orphanage work for about 100 years. In the 1970s and 80s, we kind of had to shift our focus because there wasn't as much of a need for classic orphanages in our country at that point. And so we started taking care of youth who were in the custody of the Commonwealth of Kentucky because of a severe abuse or severe neglect. And so we still continue that type of work today, but we've also launched an array of behavioral health care services for children and families so that we can address healthcare needs, behavioral health care needs, mental health needs before the problems become so acute that it requires the removal of a child from home. So we today are an organization of about 120 employees, including doctors, nurses, psychiatrists, psychologists, and we had about 4,000 impacts last fiscal year alone in terms of direct clients and family members who received either residential services or outpatient services here at CH&K Behavioral Health.
So hi, my name is Morgan Manzer, and my pronouns are he and him. And before I begin, I would just like to quickly acknowledge that I'm located in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and that's in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, our Indigenous folks here. And so I'm wearing a number of hats today. First, I am a trustee on the board of the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia, is how I came connected with you folks, and I'm very grateful to participate today. As well, my day job, I am a child protection lawyer, and I represent clients who have the province of Nova Scotia, the state, involved within their families to protect the children. As well, I just completed 5 years as chair of the board of directors of Halifax Pride, which is Canada's 4th largest Pride festival. So I would like to just focus, I think, on what the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia is doing in order to support LGBTQ plus youth in our community. And one of their primary focus is providing community grants to organizations on the ground that are best situated to support youth who are facing the disproportionate impacts of mental health, which Katie referenced at the top there. And so we've just this year given a number of grants to very important organizations within our community. But one of the things that we have focused on is ensuring that we have set up a process in an organization that prioritizes particular populations, including LGBTQ plus folks, and really is giving appropriate consideration in terms of what is it we need to do in order to ensure that we are supporting these organizations that are supporting or advancing the interests and needs of traditionally marginalized groups like LGBT plus folks. So we really need to think about how we're using our resources in order to support organizations that are assisting on the ground, because we truly believe organizations like RICS are best placed in order to help folks. So that's really what we've been focused on over the last number of years. That's obviously a constant process.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. I'm Isaiah. I work at Lighthouse Youth and Family Services here in Cincinnati, Ohio. At Lighthouse, we offer a wide range of services from infancy all the way up to the age of 24 for our young people. This includes mental health, youth housing, emergency shelters, community juvenile justice centers or services, residential treatment. We also do early intervention, and then foster care and adoption. I primarily work with our young people ages 16 to 24-year-olds that have experience with homelessness and foster care. I'm part of our Keys to End Youth Homelessness in Cincinnati with the goal of ending youth homelessness. We're one of the few programs that were selected to participate in the KEYS project. So it's a really great opportunity for us to kind of work with individuals over the course of 2 years in any youth homelessness by providing them services to getting connected with housing, mental health services, community resources, and support. So at Lighthouse, we know that the LGBTQ plus population is overrepresented in homelessness. So we really do take care to make sure that they are being provided for and they're receiving services that they need. And that includes a wide range of services that we can offer to them, because we know that in order for them to survive, they need the skills to be successful and the life skills to be successful, and they might not receive that from their families, and that's why they come into our shelters. So we do that, providing housing, additional resources, especially for our trans youth. We provide them resources through the Children's Hospital, at their trans clinic, because we know the more young people who receive the services they need, the stronger that the community becomes.
Thank you all. Before we go into the next question, I'm going to share a little bit of data that reflects on some of the things that you all just said. And Morgan, I apologize. This is all data from the United States, so you can always maybe clue us in on any sort of comparisons that you might have to your experiences in Halifax. But according to youth.gov, which is a resource of the federal government, 20% to 40% of homeless youth identify as LGBT, and African American and Native American youth are disproportionately represented among LGBT homeless youth. Furthermore, according to the CDC, 29% of transgender youth have attempted suicide, and 21% of gay and lesbian youth have attempted suicide, compared to 7% of cisgender and straight youth. With this in mind, I think you all know firsthand that many of the youth your organizations serve have experienced trauma surrounding their LGBTQ identity and potentially their families. So my question, and we'll go backwards, we'll start with Isaiah, go Morgan, and then Rick, is how can organizations and communities provide support to those youth?
I think for organizations, just recognizing the LGBTQ plus community year-round, require trainings within your organization with yearly refreshers. There's always something new to learn that will help organizations continue to be competent around LGBTQ plus topics. Provide better support for our trans youth, using their personal names and pronouns, even if you don't fully understand. If you have questions, always consult Google before asking a trans person. They are not your personal Google, for all things trans. If you are close with a trans person, make sure, and you have a specific question, make sure it's okay to ask them. Don't just assume it's okay to ask them any questions that pop into your head. For our communities, offering more safe places for LGBTQ plus youth. We need more safe places, especially here in Cincinnati, and community centers, just a one-stop shop for places people to go to, especially in our homeless youth. Not everyone can afford to have a cell phone or be able to access a computer to find and Google stuff like this. So being able to go somewhere where they can get those resources. We offer those resources at Lighthouse and our resource center. I know our libraries also offers the information about community resources as well, but not every youth knows about that information. Support groups like GLSEN, which is a gay, lesbian, straight education network. But for LGBTQ that are out of high school, that particular program only cares for people that are in school. So when you are 18, 19, you're out of high school and you're homeless and you didn't go to college, or you're not in college, you don't have a community. You have a lot of questions. Who do you turn to? Where do you turn to? You don't have a community that you know about, especially when you've been kicked out of the house. So having more support for those individuals, especially if they have trauma and mental health. So those support groups are highly needed in our community.
I think I will certainly echo a number of Isaiah's comments. A lot of my focus within all of the organizations I'm involved in is really creating safer spaces and creating a culture within those organizations that prioritizes LGBTQ plus folks and other equity-seeking groups. And one of the first things that we can do is for everyone to be committed to being mindful when interacting with anyone, but particularly when addressing folks, giving compliments with respect to pronouns, and just knowing their own limitations. And Isaiah spoke to that is, turning to Google or turning to somebody who is willing to and has the capacity to share their knowledge with respect to the community, rather than downloading that onto folks who are already facing significant challenges. It's really important for folks to not make any sort of assumptions. Whether to be gender identity, sexual orientation, racialization, pronouns, all of those things. It is very delicate, and I'm a firm believer that terminology is incredibly important and powerful for folks, and it can give people a sense of dignity and feel like they are supported in a physical environment. So it's very important. As well, I try to promote folks knowing their own limits in terms of your knowledge, in terms of your experience, in terms of your own privilege. I speak a lot about privilege. I self-identify as a gay, racialized man living with mental illness, but I also have a tremendous amount of privilege in terms of I'm a lawyer, I'm educated, I get to serve on these tremendous organizations. And so part of my responsibility that I believe that I have is to advocate for LGBTQ plus youth in other folks to ensure that they receive all the benefits that I've been so fortunate to have, and to lend a voice to their experience. And certainly one of the things as a child protection lawyer, more frequently now, I have clients who have particularly trans youth. And certainly I use every opportunity, both at court and with my own clients, is to speak to what I know of that experience, to advocate for supports for them, to use appropriate pronouns, to say why that is important, and try to get them all of the assistance that they may need to go through the transition of being a youth, and sometimes difficult circumstances which people are placed in, and give them the tools to succeed as they grow into adulthood. And one of the, I think, most powerful things is for you to know that they are supported, that they are loved, and even if you don't have that meaningful one-on-one connection, to know that there is somebody out there who is speaking up for them and is willing to say, look, we need to pay attention to this. We need to understand the experiences of LGBT plus youth, how they're disproportionately impacted in our society, and how that marginalization continues, and that somebody's going to be there fighting for them. And I think that's experience that's missing for far too many. So I think that's really important and something that we can all do on our own.
Yeah, Katie, I appreciate the question that you're asking here about how communities and organizations can be specifically helpful in supporting LGBTQ youth. We've talked about homelessness, and I think we could even expand that. In my line of work, we talk a lot about adverse childhood experiences, and there has been a tremendous amount of study undertaking over the last few decades, really starting with the Vietnam War and troops coming back from overseas and experiencing some very major difficulties in reintegrating into marriages and relationships, employment. And it took us a few years as healthcare professionals to realize something major, and that was you don't have to be a soldier returning from war overseas to experience trauma. That trauma can be experienced by a variety of populations in a variety of ways. And there is a disproportionate number of LGBTQ youth who experience adverse childhood experiences and trauma. And so, what can organizations and individuals do? First of all, be aware of what adverse childhood experiences are. We talk a lot. I love Morgan and Isaiah talking about, our friend Google. It might be worth a few minutes of time for the Cincinnati Bell family to spend a few minutes looking at what constitutes an adverse childhood experience. There are surveys that multiple public school systems throughout the US, and I'm sure Canada as well, utilize to take the temperature. During this COVID pandemic, we're really used to getting our temperatures taken. And adverse childhood experience surveys are a way of taking the temperature of youth and to see, before we ask the question, what's wrong with this kid, of asking a more important question, what happened to this kid? And if we ask the question, what happened to this kid for LGBTQ youth, we're going to see that there's a disproportionate number of adverse childhood experiences, including school-based violence, bullying. LGBTQ youth have a much higher propensity to use substances prior to their peers because of sometimes the lack of support and the interior turmoil they may feel from being different. So adverse childhood experiences would be something to start with. We know that if we're really going to take a systemic approach to addressing the disproportionate number of ACEs for LGBTQ youth, we have to talk about another type of ACE, another ACE, and that's adverse community environments. And homophobia is an adverse community environment. And I think there are those who say, well, as long as we don't say anything negative about LGBTQ youth or that population, we're doing well. That's not the case. Not saying something negative is not enough, right? So there has to be a much more direct conversation. If we are committed to making sure, and Isaiah and Morgan have both mentioned this, if we are committed to making sure that everyone feels safe in a community, it's not just enough not to say something negative. We have to be much more direct and proactive. And so things like visual cues when you come into a building go a long way. If you come to Children's Home of Northern Kentucky's 3 campuses on any given day, not just during Pride Month, but you are going to see a plethora of pride flags and other visual cues that our LGBTQ youth and families are in a safe place. When you walk into our buildings, you are going to see the fact that we are the only certified all children, all families provider in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. You're going to see that on our website. And so visibility, I think, across the board goes a long way in addressing the adverse community environment of homophobia and the effects that that has on our youth and families.
Wow, couldn't agree more. Thank you, Rick. And this time we're going to start with Morgan, and then we'll go to Isaiah, and then back to Rick. This is about the challenges that you face in your work to provide, or in your community, to make sure that culturally competent care is provided to LGBTQ youth, and maybe addressing the question of what does culturally competent care really mean?
Thank you for the question, Katie. And I think there's a number of factors that are really challenges. I think obviously the most prevalent are resources, both human and financial. Stigma is probably at the core of it all. And to have these sort of specialized programs or professionals, certainly there's a lack of them in our community, and I think that's probably consistent across Canada, across the US. So it's very important to get care in a timely manner. I think one of the challenges that I see is that given the a lack of professionals or services, it takes a significant amount of time for folks to be connected with the supports that they really need. On top of that, there's continues to be a lack of education and a lack of awareness. And I'm very fortunate. My mother actually did her PhD in terms of gay and lesbian healthcare, in terms of primary care providers. And one of the findings of her research was that everybody, well, I just wanted to treat everyone the same. Right? There's this desire to not do anything, treat anybody differently because we've been taught that that's bad. When in fact, you need to, because there are distinct things that occur within subpopulations, including LGBT plus folks. So by actually treating everyone the same, you're disadvantaging and not providing competent care to LGBT plus folks. So we need to get folks over that in terms of actually providing substantive equality and culturally competent care. We need to approach folks differently and ask the appropriate questions. And the basis of that is we need to have knowledge and program professional organizations go through are wholly inadequate in order to equip folks with the tools that they need to work with LGBT plus folks. And I think there is now, given, we have seen tremendous progress, although there's a tremendous amount of work still be done, that there is almost a fear of saying or doing anything wrong. And that makes folks apprehensive of asking the necessary questions or engaging in the necessary work in order to equip themselves with the skills and tools and necessary to work with our community.
Just to kind of reflect off of what Morgan had said, education, I think for the youth I work with, LGBTQ youth I work with, it's so important. Just the resources are available to them. They don't know. Even staff, when talking to staff or new staff that come in and they automatically assume someone's sexual orientation, and how not to, assume or make assumptions. Some of the young people that come into our shelter, they're afraid to come out because of the trauma they've experienced at home. So being able to know how to talk to them during that time and be able to be a person that they can rely on and communicate with and being a support for them, or when they do come out, or if they do decide to come out, that you're there for them. I think, when it comes to resources for our trans youth here locally, a lot of people, I see some of our young people that come in and they unfortunately are on the streets, trying to make, money, any way they can. And unfortunately, that is not always, that's never, the best option. And, they have some, health that they don't want to talk about, and they don't know about the transgender health clinic at Cincinnati Children's Hospital that can provide support. And when we going back to education again, and just, especially for our trans youth, because it's just such a hot topic in our current community, because we are talking about, pronouns, we're talking about health, legislation is now, taking away rights from our trans people across several states. So, they need to be protected. So just talking about that and just educating people, people just assume that when someone is trans, like, oh, they want to transition. That is not always the case. Just because someone trans does not mean that they want to transition. So, getting that stigma, going to the doctor and being able to have a conversation with your doctor about your health, your sex history, and being comfortable and being able to go to a doctor that's going to respect you and do the correct treatment. What Morgan said, you can't treat everyone the same, and that's very true. And unfortunately, we still live in a place where you have to Google, like, I need to find a doctor that's going to understand gay health, because I want to make sure I'm getting the appropriate services. So that is definitely something that we still need to work on.
So, Katie, the question around culturally competent care is a fascinating question. I'm doing some reading now on leadership, and I'm like I said before, it's such a privilege to be working with the leaders from Cincinnati Bell, yourself included here. In this one book I'm reading right now, the author has a contention that the number one job of leadership is to establish culture. So if you're a leader in your organization or you're in your community, task number one, before all of the other million things to do items, is what kind of culture do we want to swim and breathe in? And how are we as a community attentive to our culture at Cincinnati Bell? What kind of culture are you swimming in? And culturally competent care, I think, includes that whole notion of safety and being at home, that feeling of welcome. And so, some questions I think around culturally competent care is the whole notion of know your audience, right? It's the number one rule for public speaking. Know your audience. And so when you're looking around at Cincinnati Bell with your colleagues, sometimes it's the informal things. Does a Cincinnati Bell employee, or does an employee here at Children's Home of Northern Kentucky feel equally comfortable talking about the fact that, for example, my husband and I just got back from Seattle? Do I feel just as comfortable talking to you about my trip with my husband to Seattle as my straight peer feels talking about how he and his wife did something this weekend with the kids? So many times, especially in the LGBTQ community, we have an overactive editor at work in our lives. And we have learned, I would say, from infancy and toddlerhood, what to say, what not to say, things that can only be thoughts and not verbalized. So that whole notion of culturally competent care, sometimes we can learn a lot by what's not being said, what's not being placed on the table. I'll go maybe down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, because I'm dealing with another topic on so many days here at Children's Home of Northern Kentucky when we're working with families. And I'm also dealing with the same topic as a state commissioner for the Kentucky Human Rights Commission. Governor Beshear asked me to serve recently on the Kentucky Human Rights Commission. And one of the things that we're aware of here, at least in Kentucky, which is a very church-friendly, religiously affiliated state, we have a very high per capita church involvement here in the state. And there's this dynamic presently underway that seems to be putting two things at odds, one against the other. And that's culturally competent care. Or stated differently, how do we make sure that we have some anti-discrimination measures that are protecting LGBTQ youth? And this, I would call it this fake dichotomy, this false dichotomy of anti-discrimination measures and the whole notion of religious diversity or protection of religious freedoms. That has become a big topic in our country, and it's certainly here in Kentucky. There are those who are feeling that if I am pro culturally competent care, if I'm anti-discrimination around LGBTQ youth, that somehow is ipso facto the enemy of faith communities and religious expression. And I would just like to say that so many times our families and our faith communities can be tempted into that false dichotomy. I'm just really aware of that because of my work with the Kentucky Human Rights Commission and the whole, the current scenario around religious freedoms discussions. I'll say this: my husband and I were both ordained priests in our past life. We are not anti-faith communities. We're not anti-religion, and I think we have some work to do as members of the LGBTQ community to make sure that when we're talking with allies and families, culturally competent care isn't simply about knowing the LGBTQ community and knowing the LGBTQ family. It's also asking the question to the wider community: what's making you feel unsafe when we're having these discussions? Because otherwise, I think the temptation is we're going to get into this kind of headbutting that's really a false dichotomy around anti-discrimination measures versus religious freedom measures. So part of culturally competent care that I think sometimes we may forget in the LGBT community is asking ourselves, how is this other person I'm talking to, this potential ally, feeling unsafe? In the sense that, does he feel or does she feel that she may have to abandon commitments to a faith community or to family values, quote unquote, if they take a particular stance on culturally competent care? I think that only gets resolved by open communication and by taking a leap of trust to really practice the fine art of listening.
Wow, Rick, yeah, I could not agree more on that dichotomy. It's really part of our conversation around family, as well as our lives have been against our desires, in most cases, politicized and weaponized within the LGBT community, and in search of other outcomes that really don't have anything to do with whether or not I can, be legally married to my wife. And this idea of, family values being used against us is it can be very damaging and not fair, frankly. I have great family values. I'm incredibly close with my family in every way. So I think that dichotomy that somehow LGBT lives do not represent family values is a big issue. And your comments about culture, my leadership here across our organization might think I planted that with you, because there's such an emphasis on culture right now.
Yeah.
At the very top of the organization and across all companies. So I agree with you.
Well, it certainly wasn't planted, Katie. I will verify it was not planted. And I will say, it's easy to identify certain symptoms of culture. And the fact that Cincinnati Bell has partnered with Children's Home of Northern Kentucky for decades, and I know it's not just Children's Home of Northern Kentucky. I'm sure the same is being true in other areas of the country, in other markets, where Cincinnati Bell's culture has really not just been kept within the four walls of Cincinnati Bell, but has really taken on this whole kind of notion of this healthy and robust vine permeating outside of the walls of Cincinnati Bell to make sure that we really have this kind of culture of safety and inclusion, access, and the word that I'm using a lot is equity, which is even more important than equality. That to make sure, as both Isaiah and Morgan have mentioned, it's not about simply treating everybody the same. A cookie cutter approach doesn't work with this topic that we're discussing today. It has to be much more strategic than that.
Great. Well, that is a great lead into the fourth question here, and we'll start with Isaiah and go to Morgan and then back to Rick. So this is about our corporate partnership. What role can corporate partners play in supporting your work? And if not corporate partners, how can we as individual employees of our corporations support your work?
I would say corporate partners can continue to work with us. I know Cincinnati Bell, we just did a really great event with our youth at our Shakely Center, where we went to the Pride Night at the Cincinnati Reds baseball game, which was a really awesome event. Thank you guys again for doing that for our young people. They had a great time. It was a really awesome time. But continue to volunteer, especially for us directly. Your shelter, we're always looking for volunteers. We just started in-person volunteers again. Now that restrictions have lifted for COVID. Cooking is a great way to help our young people. We're always, they're always needing food. We have opportunities for people to come into our shelter to volunteer their time to cook for our young people. You can also, if you don't know how to cook, you can have a meal delivered. Or if you don't have time to come in, you can always drop off a meal that you've cooked at home. Another way individually you can help out is by just educating yourself about the LGBTQ plus community. Never stop learning, lead by example. That's the most important part. It starts with yourself. You have to educate yourself and be willing to learn about this community in order to help out. And just, if you have questions, like I said, Google is a great tool. There's a lot of information out there. Social media, there's our LGBTQ plus friendly social media platforms that you can follow that can provide education as well. I'm constantly learning about things that our young people are sharing with me, about things that they're needing. Just talking to a young person and asking them, what do you need in order for me to be able to help you? We always include young people in the conversation. Part of our youth advisory council is having young people at the table, at the at the top. When we're talking about policy, when we're talking about what's happening in organization, they help develop our mission statement and our vision, our vision for Lighthouse. So including young people in the conversation and just listening to them because they have a lot to say.
I'm going to build on a couple of things that Rick mentioned earlier, primarily the organizational culture, which we are all a part of, and we all have a responsibility to uphold and build so that it's supportive of LGBT plus folks. And I really look at it a little bit as a continuum. First, I see, tolerance over here, then I see acceptance, and then way over here, I see really embracing LGBT plus folks to be their true, authentic self and bring that into the workplace each and every day. And I am tremendously fortunate to work in a workplace where, like Isaiah, I have a flag on my desk. I often have a pin that I will wear to court or other places. And I am fully supported and embraced by my organization to be my true self, to talk about these issues, to participate on panels. And they are really committed to elevating my voice within this organization, within the justice system here, is to say, look, we know we need to support the work that he's doing to advance LGBT plus folks. So that's something on an organization level we can do. Individually, I think it's very important, as Rick mentioned earlier, Pride is 365. I'm pretty sure tomorrow I will still be gay. Pretty sure. So just because Pride Month is ending doesn't mean the work, the education, the conversations end. And visibility is tremendously important. Whether that's me being out in a workplace and having these conversations, talking about it openly, or symbols within places, or at the beginning of a conversation with new clients, I say, what are your pronouns? Or just saying my pronouns are he and him. Those things I think are very important and go a very long way. And in terms of something that Rick was talking about is sort of the balancing of rights and when they come into conflict, particularly religious liberty and LGBT plus rights and protections for diverse populations. And certainly it's a very different conversation here in Canada with respect to those on the whole, in terms of just last week, our parliament, our government, passed a bill banning conversion therapy, which is an outdated practice that is considered child abuse against youth, which many are forced to undergo in order to change, quote unquote, their gender identity or sexual orientation. So the conversations are a little bit differently, but how do we have those conversations and say they are not necessarily in conflict, that we can have both harmoniously? And there are many wonderful LGBTQ plus of folks of faith within our communities who are able to reconcile those identities. And certainly we should work to amplify their voice on how we can do that, and work with, I think, religious organizations that I know we have at Halifax Pride, and created partnerships. I spoke at an event a few weeks ago in terms of the experiences as an LGBT+ person in our community at a religious event. So I think that's really important, is to show up, have those conversations respectfully, find out, how we have similarities and how we can work together to support all of our rights and liberties.
Yeah, so Katie, I would say, what can corporate partners do? Know your power. In our society, it is not simply the fact that companies, that for-profit businesses simply make a product that we use and that's the end of the story. We all know that it's a much more robust story, that our companies and corporations really do play an integral part of what our life is like, and how our society functions. So know your power and lead. And not to be able to wander into waters that may seem a little frightening, right? I think that's the opportunity that we have as individuals, but also as corporate entities. I'll give you one example of how one might be able to exercise some leadership in some waters that may not seem so inviting at first. A few months ago, here in Cincinnati in northern Kentucky, we had a situation with the Cincinnati Reds and a very well-known local broadcaster who used a gay slur on air, and it was picked up, and it created a major conundrum here for the Cincinnati Reds, and the story went, in fact, national and international. And we talked a lot about that here. We're an organization that's certified as an all children, all families. We're certified as a sanctuary model. We are committed not to asking what's wrong with that person, but what happened to that person. And so we reached out to Tom Brenneman, the sports announcer in question. And we said to Tom Brenneman, Tom, we know that if you know a little bit more about how LGBTQ youth might react to hearing what you said, that you may in fact do something differently. That's going to be our wager here. And our board of trustees and our administrative team invited Tom Brenneman here to Children's Home of Northern Kentucky for a one afternoon conversation over some iced tea and lemonade about how his words impact the kids who are in our care. And in fact, the kids who might be so negatively affected by hearing that. That initial conversation led to him being here for multiple days and multiple weeks and now multiple months, and has gone through all of our training with all children, all families, and the culturally competent care of LGBTQ youth. And that incident, as uncomfortable as it was, has led to something that I think has been quite promising. And so what can corporations and businesses and individuals do? Lead, speak up, even if it is a situation where you feel like you might be out of your league and not know where this is going to go. I think that Isaiah and Morgan and I are all directly on the same page, that if you want to be an ally, even if you're not, if you don't identify as LGBTQ yourself, so many times our allies are afraid to lead because they may get a term wrong or something wrong with the vocabulary. LGBTQ youth will help you out on that. They will correct you and they will move on, and you will be the better person of it. And so part of creating a safe environment here at Children's Home of Northern Kentucky. We have a commitment to something what we call social learning. And if one of our team members drops a ball, makes a mistake, we have a culture here that says you're not going to be penalized for that. We have each other's backs. Here's another way that that might look or how that might work out. And I think in that kind of culture of social learning, you have a greater chance of taking some really exciting risks. And that's my hope for Cincinnati Bell. And really, that's my hope for our entire communities in Canada and here in the US, because I really think that's going to be pivotal in addressing these adverse community environments that create these adverse childhood experiences that so disproportionately affect LGBTQ youth and families.
Yeah, I had heard that story about Brenneman and the relationship with the children's home, and that's just an incredible success story and a way to make something positive out of something that was quite negative at the time. So in the spirit of time, I'm going to go ahead and ask some questions that came in from our organization's employees. And I'm going to ask just one person to respond, and then we'll have some closing comments. So I'm going to start with you, Morgan. And specifically this question, it's the first question that was asked, is how important is it for cisgender people to display preferred pronouns as a way to encourage awareness on preferred pronoun usage?
Thanks for the question, Katie, and to whoever submitted it. I think it's tremendously important. I spoke a little bit earlier about the power of terminology, and it really is first a sign of respect in terms of using folks' preferred pronouns, and us cisgender folks would expect the same, right? If somebody said she, I would probably say, oh, no, I identify as a man, and I would go with he. So I actually don't even refer to them anymore as preferred pronouns. They are my pronouns. In that trans, non-binary folks, gender fluid folks have the right to self-determination, to live their authentic self and identify in that way. They are their pronouns. They don't prefer them. They are a fact. So in terms of, and that's one simple thing that I did, is that I put my title today, I put my pronouns, I have put them in my email signature, and I didn't say, oh geez, everyone in the organization did this, and just over time it caught on, and everybody in the organization was doing it. And I have a land acknowledgement at the end of mine. Everybody in the organization was doing it, from our CEO down. It caught on as, look, actually this is something we should be doing in order to demonstrate our commitment to the community and our respect and dignity for who they are as people, and provide them the ability to live their authentic self. And that's part of creating safer spaces and environments where people can be themselves. I think it's really important that folks commit to that.
Great, thank you. Isaiah, this next question's for you. Actually, we have an observation and a question that are similar topics. So the observation is, and these are topics around age. And the observation says that changing older people's opinions and prejudices is very difficult, but as a whole, young people are the actual leaders of social acceptance and change, but it takes time. And from another submittal, they said, I have personally witnessed that the next generation is much more equipped with the right language, although I live in a very large city. Do the panelists see this trend in the region as well?
I would say yes. We definitely see the trend. It's going across the board. Organizations, when Morgan was talking about using the pronouns, we at Lighthouse, everyone across the board, it's in our signature. It comes up, the pronouns. We also incorporate visibility, being your authentic self. When we are working with our youth, we are talking about our life. I talk about my husband. I share my story. They see that. So when they come to us to have those conversations, they're not getting a surprise shock like, oh my gosh, you're talking about this. I think being visible and being out and people seeing that, people feel more and more comfortable. It's not this whole mentality where you have to be in the closet or you have to hide that private part about yourself. You can be able to still share your personal story and connect with some of these young people. Social media is a big thing that's kind of pushing the drive. We're hearing the stories. People are sharing their stories on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and it's having conversations. Schools, we're seeing schools are having conversations about LGBTQ plus. They have support groups. Listen, we have parent advocacy groups, and I think it's just interesting when I had a coworker who was talking about a trans youth, and her son's like, "Oh, mom, you use the wrong pronoun. It's they them," and she's like, "What? How did you know this?" "Oh, we learned about this in school." So we're hearing about it in our schools, and I think our kids are educating us about what's happening, and I think that as a whole is just phenomenal that we are having a conversation and that it is being shown in a positive light. And I think as we continue to have the education and conversation, as more people feel comfortable coming out, we see the older generation, loving their children, accepting them more and more. And yes, there are still some people that we get in our homeless shelters, but we also work with some of those family members about rebuilding that rapport. It might not happen overnight, but down the road, we slowly put in those blocks to kind of help establish that relationship. And we see some successes in that aspect about rebuilding connection and finding community and support.
Perfect, thank you. I'm just going to ask one more question before we go into closing comments, and for both time's sake and because I do believe that the rest of the questions were answered during this conversation. So I think you all, provided exactly the sorts of information that people were looking for. So Rick, the last question is, how should one discuss the ongoing political and legal side of gender issues with young people? There sure is a lot of hate and hate-adjacent language involved in the public discourse.
Yeah, well, I always like to begin conversations with 3 questions, right? It's the fine art of how do I enter into dialogue with people who may see things and feel things differently than I do. I know that part of our sanctuary culture here at Children's Home of Northern Kentucky, we have a little meeting before any conversation or any activity. And the 3 questions are, how am I feeling right now? Because I'm bringing, at any given point, I am bringing emotions to the table when I'm having a conversation, and addressing the feelings right away is going to help put some really helpful space together for the conversation. And the second question is, what's my goal for having this conversation? If my goal is I want you to believe what I believe, I want you to feel what I'm feeling, we might have some work to do about that goal. And then the third question is, who are you going to ask for help with whatever the goal is, right? So if the goal is, I want to understand where you're coming from with your take on this political question or on this faith-based question, if my goal is to listen, then I'm really going to be in a position in that third question that I'm going to need some help. I don't have all of the information. I don't have all of the facts. As human beings, that's a constant for us. The most successful people in our organizations and in our societies and cultures are the people who are realizing that there are others around them who play a vital role in community and have information that they need. So maybe that would be a starting point in those kind of conversations. Start with how am I feeling? What's the goal here? Who am I going to have to ask for help with that goal? I think the other thing that could help in those kind of conversations that we use a lot here with our residents and with our outpatient clients is the ability to claim an ouch moment. So sometimes folks don't realize that something that they're saying is offensive to an LGBTQ person. And so many times culturally, we're trained not to say something if somebody has inadvertently offended us. So here at Children's Home, We have a little thing that if we're having a conversation and someone has inadvertently said something that's offensive, we simply have a little rule that says, ouch. And we know that maybe we need to spend a little bit more time on a preconceived notion or a statement that was made. I hope those little techniques might be helpful there.
Absolutely. Morgan talked about mindfulness. It's just so important. Well, real quickly here, I just want to offer each person, 30 seconds to reflect on any closing thoughts, either around the topics discussed today or on what family means to you personally. And I'll start with Morgan, and then we'll go to Rick, and we'll finish with Isaiah.
First of all, I just want to thank you for having me this morning. It's been a real pleasure. As well, I want to thank you folks for having this conversation, because these are the types of conversations that create the culture that Rick is talking about, which I think is so fundamental to advancing LGBTQ folks. So this is tremendously important. And I think family will look very different to every person, but it is that connection, that human connection with one another, that I think is core to our human experience. And so I think anytime we can support one another, be compassionate and empathetic with one another, be understanding. And I think some of the stories that Rick talked about, particularly about the Cincinnati Reds and Tom, is showing that understanding, providing that space for folks to make mistakes, and that to be okay and learn from it. Because, I think in our culture, we've now are moving away from that, is that we're not allowing people to make errors and improve themselves for the better, ultimately all of us. So I think if we can create environments where we do that and have these really difficult conversations, we'll be better off. Thank you so much.
Katie, thanks again to you and the Cincinnati Bell family for allowing us to have this time. I'm really grateful for this. I think I'll use my closing comment just to say this. If we really want to be that change that all of us are seeking in the world, right, we have to make sure we're starting off on that journey on a right foot in the right place. And so I would just say, all of this work can be really overwhelming. There's work to be done. I'm feeling very positive about what I see in terms of a younger generation who's more aware and educated. However, I'm not naive. I know that there are places that are very still filled with violence and are not safe places for LGBTQ youth. And addressing that can sap the energy out of a Cincinnati Bell employee, out of an attorney, out of childcare workers, out of a CEO. And so I would just end this conversation by saying, pay attention to what you're doing for self-care. What are you doing to make sure that you're paying attention to your own breathing, to make sure that you're taking care of your own relationships, that you're getting the exercise and the food that your body needs, because I think this is a battle that's not going to be short in duration. It's really going to be for the rest of our lives. And we have to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves while we make that journey together.
Thank you, Katie and Cincinnati Bell, and thank you, Morgan and Rick, for being part of this. This is a really great opportunity for us to be able to speak to Cincinnati Bell about the great work we're doing and just help educate them a little bit about what they can do to better their organizations. Family to me is just that love, that unconditional love, rather it is your chosen family or your family you're born with. It's a support system, a community that embraces us, and they're there for us when we need them, and they help us discover who we're meant to be. They're there for the good, the bad. It's that unbreakable bond that transcends gender, race, and blood. I think as we continue to work on ourselves and go out there and we do continue to do this work for the LGBTQ plus community. You know, it starts at home. We have to start at home and then spread it out, spread the love out. Never stop learning, continue to educate yourself. Even as a gay man, I am constantly learning from our young people about new terminology and just new things that are happening in the world today. And they're always there for me. And I, also help them as well, learn new things and connect some of the resources. Google is your friend. Don't forget that. And just, continue to love one another and just be there for our young people when needed, because they still need a lot of help, and we still do have a long way to go, especially for our trans youth.
Well, just wrapping it up here, I want to say thank you to all three of you tremendously for the work you do every day. It means so much to our entire community. And thank you for your time this morning, your wonderful discussion. I wish we could just hang out and be friends. And and I also want to say thank you to the Pride ERG leadership team, all of the committee members, and everyone across the Cincinnati Bell Company who has supported our work over Pride Month and 365 days a year. So I hope everybody has a wonderful day. And, thanks again, and happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
Right.